Jose Antonio Vargas is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, filmmaker, and media publisher. He's the founder of Define American, a nonprofit media and culture organization that seeks to elevate the conversation about immigration and citizenship in America, and the founder and editor of Emerging US, a digital magazine focusing on race, immigration, and identity in a multicultural America. In 2011, the New York Times Magazine published an essay Vargas wrote in which he revealed and chronicled his life in America as an undocumented immigrant. A year later, he appeared on the cover of Time Magazine worldwide with fellow undocumented immigrants as part of a follow-up cover story he wrote. He then produced and directed Documented, a documentary feature film on his undocumented experience. Documented was released theatrically and broadcast on CNN in 2014 and received a 2015 NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Documentary. In 2015, MTV aired as part of its Look Different campaign, White People, a television special he produced and directed on what it means to be young and white in contemporary America. Please welcome Jose Antonio Vargas.
Oh my God. There's a lot of you. Okay, can I take a picture? Okay, wait. Smile. Oh, how am I gonna fit you? Oh yeah, huh? Oh, never mind. I'm messing it up. Thank you for having me here. This feels like a homecoming to me. Not only because my apartment is 3 blocks away from this hotel, but because I am who I am today, and I'm old, I'm 35 years old. I am who I am today because I was one of you. Well. I hope I made that clear. I am who I am today because I am one of you. And this feels like a homecoming as well because almost 23 years ago, my mother in the Philippines sent me to America to live with her parents, my grandparents. I landed at the Los Angeles International Airport, which is, I'm sure y'all came from there. I landed at that airport in 1993, so a long time ago. And I was really confused because when I was in the Philippines, I thought America was Baywatch and Whitney Houston. I'm Filipino, so where I come from, we don't have white, black, Latino, whatever. It's all Filipinos. And I didn't know that Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson were black until I got here. Because we didn't call them black, we just called them Americans. And instantly I was confused because if you're not black or white, where do you fit in this black and white dynamic in this country, right? Like where do Asians and Latinos fit in the black and white thing? Where do mixed race people fit in the black and white thing? Now, 4 years after coming here, when I was 16, I went to the DMV to get a driver's license, like any 16-year-old. And that's when I found out that the green card that my grandfather had given me was fake. I am definitely in a room full of journalists. Okay. So I found out it was fake. And you know, the woman at the DMV, the woman who was processing me, she leaned in the table and she said, "This is fake. Don't come back here again." My first instinct was, I'm not Mexican. Which is a horrible thing to think, but I thought that because in the media, when I was growing up in the mid-1990s, whenever people talked about illegal people or fake papers or immigration, the media always said Mexican people. And since my name is Jose, I'm like, hey, maybe she thinks I'm Mexican. You know, and by the way, a little hint from me to you, if you see an Asian-looking person with a Latino name, it means they're Filipino. There are about 100 million of us. It's called Spanish colonialism. It's really, really important to know this. So I thought maybe I should correct this woman, but then I didn't. I went home, and that's when my grandfather confirmed to me that what this woman said was right, that the green card was fake and I was here illegally. Now, mind you, I didn't know what to do. And this was before there was Google or the internet, so I didn't know who to tell. I thought maybe I was the only non-Mexican Latino person who was in this situation. I didn't know what to do. But thankfully, a year later, Mrs. Dewar, she was, oh, okay. You know what that means? They're from Mountain View High School. That's what that means. So Mrs. Dewar at Mountain View High School, she was my AP English teacher sophomore year, and then she said that she also was the advisor for the school paper. I'm like, okay, whatever. I didn't know what that meant. But she said that I didn't know. I wasn't one of those kids, and I wasn't one of you yet when this happened, right? But Mrs. Dewar said I asked too many annoying questions, and I should do this thing called journalism, right? But I'm like, I don't know. But I realize in my first newspaper article from the Mountain View Oracle, over there, this is my first article for my high school newspaper, right? And when you write for the article, I didn't realize that you get this thing called the byline, which meant that your name is on the paper. So my very naive 17-year-old self thought, wait a second, if I can't be on the paper, what if I can't be here because I don't have the right papers, what if my name is on the paper? Doesn't that mean I exist? Doesn't it mean that I am here, I'm writing in English, I'm talking to people, I'm respecting them, I'm not, right? So literally for me, a byline, this is my first ever front page article from my local newspaper in Mountain View Voice. Literally a byline for me was a way of existing. So journalism was not just an elective class. Journalism for me wasn't just what happened at, after school. Yeah, it was about deadlines. Yeah, it was about interviewing people. It was about making a lot of friends. My friends now, all my closest friends now are all my Oracle buddies from high school. It wasn't just about all of that. For me, literally, journalism was a way to exist and a way to contribute and a way to make sense of this country, which is now my adopted country, right? And I thought I could just keep doing this, just keep existing, just write as many articles as possible, write for a big paper like the Washington Post, the New York Times, or whatever. You should win a Pulitzer or a Pulitzer, I don't know how you pronounce it. Win one of those things. I thought maybe you should, be a political reporter because people think that's like a cool, sexy thing to do. And then I thought maybe you need to write for this thing called The New Yorker. If you want to be a serious writer, you have to write for this magazine where they publish like $10, $15 words that people don't understand, right? And those really weird black and white cartoons that are supposed to be ironic. I'm from an immigrant family. I didn't know what irony meant. But I thought if I'm going to be successful, I should do all of these things. So I did. About 5 years ago, I landed an exclusive interview with Mark Zuckerberg before the Facebook movie came out. And I wrote this long-ass 9,000 words. 9,000 words, 9,000 word profile of Mark Zuckerberg. I had a month and a half to do it. I wrote this profile, and when I was interviewing Mark, he's a pretty friendly guy. He's not like how people like media portray him. So at one point, here I am asking him questions like, hey, what do you really want from us? Why do you keep wearing the exact same shirt? Did you steal the idea from the Winklevi? How much money do you want to make off this? Some uncomfortable questions, right? But at one point, Mark turned around and started asking me questions. But I'm the journalist. I'm the one that asks questions. You don't ask me questions. But he was asking me a question. He said, hey, Jose, where are you from? Which, for any immigrant, is always a very kind of heavy question. Now, mind you, the easy answer to this question was where I'm from Mountain View, which is right next door to Palo Alto. Easy, right? But really, where I'm from is I'm not supposed to talk about where I'm from. Where I'm from is I'm supposed to lie to you about where I'm from. Where I'm from is I'm supposed to speak in a perfectly accented English so that you don't think I'm not from here. Where I'm from is you call us criminals, you call us illegals, and I try not to internalize any of that, and I try to prove to people that I am here, that I exist, and I'm trying to contribute. That's where I'm from. So when he asked me that question, I was kind of done. And then at that same time, I was reading a book. It's a really amazing book called The Race Beat. This book won a Pulitzer in 2010, Pulitzer for History. It's a book about what happened when white journalists from the North went to the South and started calling it what it was. When white journalists from the North came to the South and said that what was happening to black people, to African Americans in this country, was un-American. That racism was ugly and it was unacceptable. When all these white journalists took the mantle of, what do you call it, objectivity, and actually called it what it was. That's what this book was about. So I'm reading this book. I had just profiled Mark Zuckerberg. People wanted me to write a book on Mark Zuckerberg, and I'm like, I was kind of done. I was depressed. I thought maybe I'd just become successful. You win awards, you make a lot of money. You live in New York, in the Village somewhere, because Woody Allen shot his films in the Village, and they're cool. I thought you did all of that, no problem. But I was the same person that people called illegal, right? My circumstance is not different from the people who clean your houses and mow your lawns and serve you drinks, right? So I did something that no one had ever done, and I did something against the advice of 27 lawyers. And I did something that I think scares a lot of us journalists, which is reporting on our own selves. What happens when you actually report on your own life? So I did this. Isn't that the most horrible photo you've ever seen? So against the advice of 27 lawyers, I admitted to everything I ever had to do, every lie I had to tell, just to be in this country. You know when you get a job, my first job was at Subway Sandwiches, making Subways, and there's an employment form that you fill out. There's a box that you have to check. You have to check resident alien box or US citizen box. I can't check resident alien because I don't have an alien card. By the way, alien, I'm not from Mars. It's kind of weird, right? So you know what I did? I had a conversation with myself and I thought, okay, if I can't be a US citizen because I don't have papers, if I can't be a US citizen because I was born here, maybe I should just check the box and try to earn it. But according to my lawyers, every time I checked the box, it was a felony. And I checked it like 10 times. So that's why they're like, hey, don't do this. Don't be crazy. Don't go to the New York Times and write it. But my responsibility as a journalist was to tell the truth. So I did. And then I waited, because I thought, at that point, President Obama was deporting about 400,000 immigrants a year. President Obama has deported more than 2 million immigrants in the past 7 years, more than any other president in the history of this country. By that point, President Obama was deporting all these people, and here I am. I just plopped myself in the car of the New York Times Sunday magazine, and I'm waiting. I had paid my credit card bills. I paid Best Buy, American Express. I had packed my stuff, because I'm like, hey, maybe they'll come after me. I had taken my money out of Bank of America and gave it to my grandmother to hide. I had all of that. But then no one from the government called. Stephen Colbert called. He said he wanted me on a show. Bill O'Reilly called. He said, hey, come to the show. I don't understand why they're not deporting you. I don't know why not, Bill. So I go on the show, and then nothing from the government. So about 5 months after this, I called the editor of Time magazine, who I happened to know, and I told him that I wanted to write a follow-up story, a reported essay, about why the government has not deported me. The editor of Time, hey, if you're a journalist, you owe it to the story. Go all the way, right? The editor was like, are you crazy? And then he said, okay, if you're ready for this, let's go. So I actually called the Department of Homeland Security myself. Hey, anything for journalism. Hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas. I have not heard from you. Are you going to deport me? Why? Why not? It's kind of funny, but it's not. The woman on the other line was like, oh, I know who you are. Let me put you on hold. She got back on the line, and then she said, we can't comment on your case. What do you mean you can't comment? I'm on deadline, yo. It's 5,000 words. It's the cover story. We need to do art. I need a comment from the government. And she said, no comment. We do not comment on individual cases, she said. And then if you think about it, because as a journalist, what do? We report and then we synthesize. So let's synthesize this, right? No comment. What does that mean? You know what that means? That's a metaphor. That's a metaphor for how most Americans think of us. So long as someone is babysitting your kids and mowing your lawns and serving you drinks, so long as someone's harvesting the tomatoes that end up on the In-N-Out burgers, so long as somebody's doing the cheap labor that this country cannot seem to want to do, you're cool, no problem. I'm sorry, isn't this a country built on the back of cheap labor? Free? Talk to black people about that. Who built the South? Talk to the Irish and the Chinese who built the railroads, right? No comment. No comment. It's not your issue. It's about the wall. It's about Mexico. It's about these people, right? And what does the media does? It falls right into it. So no comment. So the editor was like, hey, we'll put you on the cover of Time. I'm like, no, I already did that. I was horrible. Why don't we do something different? So this is, to this day, probably my proudest moment as a print journalist. That is 22 million copies of Time magazine around the world, the first time undocumented immigrants were on the cover of a major magazine. In that magazine is a young woman named Tolu, who was born in Nigeria and moved to the United States when she was 12. Why don't we ever talk about undocumented Africans and Caribbeans in this country? There's a young man named Manny, who was born in Germany, then moved here when he was 10, to Ohio specifically. There's a Korean guy named Tony Choi, who was born in Korea, moved to the United States when he was 10 or 11. 1 out of 7 Koreans in this country are undocumented. 1 out of 7 Koreans in this country is undocumented. That cover right there represents the diversity of this issue that the mainstream media, for the most part, has completely and utterly and irresponsibly ignored. That's what it looks like. Right? We are so busy calling people names and we are so busy politicizing this issue that we actually have not really reported the facts. Facts. I'm a reporter. I'm a journalist. Journalism is like church to me. Reporting is my religion. So I get really upset when people can't seem to, work this thing called Google. You guys should be so happy. When I was in high school journalism, there was no Google. You guys can just research in Wikipedia away, although you have to go to the source, right? And make sure that the right sourcing. So, sources. This fact, right? Did you know that undocumented workers, people like me, have paid $100 billion into the Social Security Fund in the past decade? $100 billion. And you know who the source for the information is? It's not some right-wing group or left-wing group. The source of the information is the Social Security Administration themselves. Primary source, right? Do you ever hear this statistic anywhere? Now, I personally, apparently, using an invalid and fake Social Security number, has paid maybe about $180,000 into the fund, because I've been working since I was a teenager. But guess what? Apparently, I don't have access to any of that. None of us do. Isn't it fascinating that the government wants to deport us, but they want to collect the money? And where does the money go? Hey, one of the number 1 rules in journalism, follow the money. Where does it go? And isn't it fascinating that the very people that call us a bunch of criminals and illegals, when really we are actually the ones helping keep Social Security solvent? Now, isn't that fascinating? Where's the reporting on that, right? Did you know that since 9/11, we as a country have spent about $100 billion in border enforcement? $100 billion protecting you from Mexico. I don't know, from Chipotle. Now, as a reporter, why don't I give you some facts? What if I told you that there are actually more Americans going to Mexico than Mexicans going to the United States? The lowest number record of illegal border crossings since the 1970s. What if I told you that 40% of the undocumented population in this country overstayed their visa? 40%. They didn't cross the border. And to me, here's the harder question. Has humanity ever built a border that could withstand human will? So long as people are hungry, they'll cross whatever border you put in front of them. So long as there are parents who want to provide and would die for their kids, they would cross whatever border you put in front of them. Isn't that what happened when the Irish had the potato famine and they had to figure out where to go? What did they do? Mind you, back then, no one checked any visas. Irish people, white people just crossed the border. Actually, they were Irish. Then they got to America. Then many years later, they became white. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how that happened. And here, again, follow the money. Here's the interesting point. Why is it that we put a sign out of the border saying keep out? And then 10 yards in, what do we say? Help wanted. You can't have it both ways. You can't keep wanting cheap labor and then call people a bunch of criminals and then, oh my God, aren't they the ones, taking our jobs and speaking Spanish at Walmart and causing all this trouble? Now that is the master narrative on immigrants. Now, what is our role as journalists to break that narrative? What is our role as journalists to report and contextualize the facts? What is our job as journalists to humanize a very political issue? Right? Now, mind you, and by the way, since I am talking to you, this fact to me is very, very important. I graduated high school in 2000. Were you like in middle school? No, you weren't even born yet. Were you born? No. Some of you. Okay, great. So I graduated high school in 2000. A year later, they introduced this thing called the DREAM Act. Do you guys know what that is? Yes, good reporters. There's a thing called the DREAM Act, right? Now, mind you, that legislation has been stalled since 2001. There is no national DREAM Act. Thankfully, we are in the state of California, so there's in-state tuition for undocumented students in the state. But in many parts of the country, that's not the reality. In the state of Georgia, if you're undocumented, you can't go to the top 5 schools. If you're undocumented in the state of Alabama, you can't go to any of the schools, public or private. Doesn't matter if you've been in Alabama since you were 5, you can't go. Now, this is the reality of this issue. And as a journalist, I have a lot more questions, right? What do you want to do with all these kids? What do you want to do with all these undocumented kids, many of whom have grown up with you? Do you want them to be in perpetual limbo? Now, mind you, I understand that every country has a right to define and defend its borders. I get that, especially in the age of terrorism. I totally get that. But there are actually harder questions to ask, which is, what does a modern immigration system actually look like? Who do we want to be here and why? Why is it that when we talk about immigration, we don't ask the harder questions like, what does U.S. foreign policy and U.S. trade agreements have to do with migration patterns? Why do people move? When all those Central American refugees 2 summers ago started walking from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala to get here, right? Who sold those Central American countries the guns? Who started the drug war? What did NAFTA do not only to the United States, but to Mexico? So as I said, I'm Filipino. There's 4 million of us in the United States. We're the 3rd largest immigrant group. Mexicans, Chinese, and Filipino. A few months ago, I was in North Carolina, and this man was getting a little upset, and he said, I don't understand why there's so many of you here. 4 million. By the way, those are U.S. citizens, naturalized U.S. citizens, right? All I could say to the gentleman was, sir, we are here because you were there. Spanish-American War, remember? When the Philippines became a protectorate of the United States like Puerto Rico? Now again, these are facts. This is history. This is context. Why aren't we not asking these questions? Instead, what do? We call people names, right? Can you think of any other issue in the American vernacular in which we refer to people as illegal? Now, you guys are sitting, hopefully. Did you guys see this? Can everybody please look at this? See, this is where it gets really interesting. As a reporter, I'm obsessed with facts. So calling somebody illegal is actually inaccurate because to be here illegally is a civil offense and not a criminal one. Calling somebody illegal is actually very, very imprecise as a journalist because you would want to know, why is this person here illegally? Did they overstay their visa? Are they waiting to get their papers? What is the familial circumstance? Again, can you think of any other term? In what other context do we call people illegal? If someone is driving a car, we say at age 14, we call people underage driver, not illegal driver. If someone is driving under the influence, we call them a drunk driver, not an illegal driver. Now, let's not play, I'm not trying to be politically correct here. I am here illegally. I, as a person, am here illegally. The Border Patrol people can come here right now and arrest me if they wanted to. But I, as a person, am not illegal. Because people can't be illegal. Right? Again, actions. Let's not play political correctness here. Actions are illegal, not people. And calling people illegal actually just gets in the way of us journalists being more descriptive and more accurate with our language. So, as a fellow journalist, I have a favor to ask all of you. If you believe that words matter, if you believe that the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, all these news organizations should be more careful about the words that they use, please hold the sign up. Hold it up. No pressure. No pressure. And I know what you're going to do. I know you're going to go back to defineamerican.com. You're going to go to our Words Matter page, and you're going to sign your high school newspaper, and you're going to say that in your high school newspaper, words matter. Right? Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Now, and since we are in this question of legality, since we are talking about legality, I think we should remember history. And I think we should talk about context. Did you know that that in this country, the first time we ever actually had laws on citizenship was 1790? 1790. And the only people who could be American citizens were free white people. In this country, it wasn't until 1924 that Native Americans were given citizenship rights. Let me repeat this. It wasn't until 1924 that the original Americans, the Native Americans, who we call Indians because somebody got lost and call it India, right? They were not given citizenship rights until 1924. Don't you think it's rather tragic that in this country we don't even talk about Native American people? We don't even really know that among the highest suicide rates across the country are young Native Americans. Why aren't they a part of the conversation about race, immigration, and identity? To them, all of us are undocumented immigrants. Shouldn't we be asking them for permission more than anybody else? So don't talk to me about legality. Don't talk to me about laws if you can't talk to me about justice. They're not the same thing. And when I travel around the country, what I realize is I cannot only talk about immigrant rights and not connect it to all the other issues that we're grappling with. I can't talk to you about immigrant rights and not talk about LGBTQ rights. I'm also gay, by the way. I can't talk to you about that without talking about women. Oh, thanks. I can't talk to you about LGBT rights and not talk about women's rights. And not talk about income inequality among all the races, white, black, Asian, Latino, right? I can't talk to you about immigrant rights and not talk about Black Lives Matter. Now, mind you, since we are talking about citizenship, a few months ago, I was in the University of Minnesota. I made a film. It's on Netflix. It's called Documented. Check it out. I made this film. After the film, in the screening, this man got up and said, Mr. Vargas, a young African-American man, he said, Mr. Vargas, I'm really conflicted. I want you to be an American citizen. I think you've worked hard for it. But I'm conflicted because I was born here. My family's here. We helped build this country. They were from the South, and they migrated to the North, the Great Migration, black people, right? I'm conflicted because I don't know if I want the citizenship for you that I can't even have myself. As a black man in this country, sometimes I don't feel like I'm treated as a citizen. I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know what to say to an elderly black woman in North Carolina. She came to this event and she said to me, Mr. Vargas, I saw you on Rachel Maddow's show, and I thought it was really interesting that you're talking about how your life is subjected to pieces of papers. Because, my great-great-great-grandmother came to this country, landed in Charleston, South Carolina, was given a piece of paper called a bill of sale, saying that she's a slave. So can you connect the dots between the papers that my great-great-great-grandmother was given and the papers that you can't seem to get? Now, is that about immigration? What is that about? Those are the hard questions that we all have to grapple with. I would argue in front of all of you, since journalism to me is a rough draft of American history. In this country, we have never fully told our own history to each other. And it's gonna be your job to do that. It's gonna be your job to be really honest about these issues and to be really honest about the conversations about race, immigration, and identity. That's why I've decided, since they haven't deported me, I don't know why not, I've decided that I'm gonna stick to doing what I know to do. I'm a journalist, right? I've made 3 films. To me, it's really exciting, the marriage of print journalism, podcasting, documentary, filmmaking in the age of social media. I find all of that really exciting. As far as I'm concerned, congratulations to all of you. I cannot think of a more exciting time to be a journalist, and I cannot think of a better time and a more important time to be really good at what we do, right? I'm dead serious about that. So I've decided to form my own media company. So Kelly, again, thank you for inviting me here. So this is how crazy our immigration system is in this country. Kelly can't hire me because I'm undocumented, and you can't knowingly hire an undocumented person, although we know that some people do, right? We're in Los Angeles, the epicenter of the undocumented community. But guess what? I can hire Kelly. As an undocumented person, I can hire US citizens, employ people, and create a business. I can also, at Define American, I employ 12 people. At Emerging Us, I'm employing maybe 5, 6 people right now. I'm trying as much as possible to give people benefits, right? Health benefits, to be fair to people. Unfortunately, since I am undocumented, I'm not eligible for any of the benefits that I want to provide to my employees. So I've decided that this is what we're doing. And for us, Emerging Us, are you guys familiar with Vice? Do you like Vice? This is like Vice, but better. And I'm showing you this because I know that at some point you're going to have story ideas for me. At some point you're going to want to intern with us. So here's what Emerging Us is all about. Right. 5 years ago, I took the biggest risk of my life.
My guest tonight is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who recently admitted he is an illegal immigrant.
Last year, I made a film called White People.
There's already outrage from some corners over a new MTV documentary that the network says takes a look at white people.
In 2016, I want to talk about us, all of us. So this is actually the US Census form. Like, what do you check?
White. I don't like that.
It makes us
seem like we're all the same people.
Yeah. As people who look kind of racially ambiguous, people ask us, what are you, a lot, and so we're going around asking people, what are you?
To see little African-American girls playing with blonde hair, blue-eyed dolls, are they playing with these dolls because they feel these dolls are prettier than they are?
I feel like tech is kind of like the boyfriend that you think has a lot of potential. When you are an underrepresented person in tech, it is the death by 1,000 paper cuts.
There's all these expressions that are just flying around in our culture. Be a man, man up. There's a lot of acceptance around being a tomboy, and that acceptance is just not really here yet for a little boy carrying a doll.
Today it was 100 degrees in the fields and there's people picking fruit. And people on top of that demean them, that's not right. And those are good immigrants.
Well, I didn't come from a privileged background. The first house that I can remember living in was 2 rooms and the bathroom was outside. White privilege, I'm not buying that.
Race is the third rail because comedy has become segregated.
Arab Americans have no one to really look up to that's in the media. Being an actor, every single role for Middle Eastern was terrorist.
We're literally changing the face of what civil rights looks like.
We are the founders of #BlackLivesMatter.
I identify in a lot of different ways.
I identify as
Korean
American Jew.
I identify as being Arab.
I identify as American.
In the past few years, I've realized that a new chapter in American history has begun. The minority is becoming the majority. And together, we are remaking the mainstream. Help us tell America's story. Thank you. So, each one of those videos are about 3 minutes to 7 minutes long. Every single one of them will come packaged with an essay, an article, a slideshow. Sometimes I think, to me, one of the more exciting things about journalism now is we get to ask ourselves, what is the best way to tell this story? Is it an article? Is it an essay? Is it a podcast? Is it a video? Like, how should we tell this story? I'm fascinated by Snapchat. I'm fascinated by how that can really help with storytelling, right? Especially when people grapple with their identity. That to me is really, really interesting. And these are the questions that, for us at Define American, the very core of our journalism is asking this fundamental question. Who are we and who are we becoming? You're in Los Angeles. Did you know that 72% of all women in Los Angeles are women of color? 72%. In California, 51% of all Californians aged 25 and under is Latino. 51%. For the first time in American public schools, white students across the country are in the minority. So if you think about it, the country is only going to get gayer. More LGBTQ people will come out. It's only going to get blacker, browner, more Latino, more Asian. Women of all racial and ethnic backgrounds will continue and must break every possible barrier there is to break. Wait. So what's left? Who's left? Straight white guys. I love straight white guys. You're wonderful. I'm friends with a lot of you. But this is where it gets really uncomfortable. This is where it gets really uncomfortable. Straight white men, the ones who wrote the Constitution, the ones who control all institutions in America, the straight white guys that control most American newsrooms in this country, are now going to have to realize that not all stories must be told from their objective perspective. And you know what needs to happen if you're a person of color? It's really important that when we talk about diversity, we include white people in the conversation. Oop. Because you know what happens, right? What happens is people of color talk amongst ourselves. We call it the diversity summit or something. And then we talk about you behind your back. We can't do that anymore. That's not going to get us anywhere. I would argue that we are where we are when we talk about race in this country because our conversations are far too comfortable and too safe. We are unwilling to tell the truth, journalistically, morally, and ethically. But you know what the good news is? Your generation of journalists is going to change all of that. You will change all of that. And how do we challenge? How do we challenge constructions? How do we challenge narratives like, oh, good immigrant, model minority, oh, those Asian people, they study so hard? How do we break all of these narratives? Here's an example of one from Emerging Us, of how we're doing that.
When Mexico sends its people,
They're not sending their best.
they're sending people.
They have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems to us.
They're bringing drugs.
They're bringing crime.
They're rapists.
He said this aloud.
Donald Trump's words coming out of my mouth.
It's just being ignorant. And I take offense. This is me.
Do a little fact checking.
I mean, there were drugs and rapists here before immigrants.
The good ones, of which there are many, I want to expedite it
so they can come back in. Sorry. Okay, let me pick that up. I'm so angry. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be the good immigrant, because I feel like to have the good immigrant, you also would have to have the bad immigrant.
That's one way to challenge something, right? At Emerging Us, another issue we're going to cover is diversity in Hollywood, in front of the camera and behind the camera. Why is it that in a country that is becoming more and more diverse, we see not that many people of color in romantic leading roles? Why is it always the sassy black girlfriend? Why is it always the nerdy Asian guy? Why is it always this curvaceous Latina with an accent? Like, what is that about, right? So we actually interviewed actors of all races, talking to us about what happens when they audition for roles. What do people say?
I get that all the time. I'm not Italian enough. I don't know what I need to do. Should I wear an apron? Should I be yelling, Anthony? I mean, what's Italian enough?
Stereotypes for me have often been geeks, men who are afraid of women.
Death to the Americans, Allahu Akbar.
A woman who is described as Inuit-y.
Scientists, doctors, a lot of stuff with accents.
And then he's like, okay, that was great, but can you speak in an accent? Like, I'm sad and Mexican. And I had to have an accent because I'm poor.
You make these compromises with yourself very often, and there's a fine line because people don't always separate you from what you play.
It's often just the best friend or just the butt of the joke. It's very one-noted.
Hollywood's the place you can be racist, you can be sexist, you can be, because you're, well, I'm trying to fill a role.
I want to say, by the way, I've been a journalist for a while, and to me, what's exciting about being a journalist is there's so many different kinds of journalism. I was one of those breaking news journalists who's like, I was obsessed about always being the first person. I was one of those journalists that was like, I covered the school beat, the homicide beat, the city hall beat, all of those beats. But for me, another part of our role as a journalist is how do we facilitate conversations? How do we give voices to people who don't have them, right? What kind of questions should we be asking? So one of the questions that we're asking at Emerging Us is, what does it mean for white Americans to be an emerging minority in this country? Which is the reality in all cities in this country, right? So I find it really interesting in LA, they talk about minorities and marginalized people. Well, people of color are the majority here, so what are you talking about? And when you say marginalized by whom? And why, right? So I actually made a film for MTV called White People. It aired last summer. You might have heard of it. Rush Limbaugh loved it. And MTV actually did a study. We did a study with Define American. They interviewed 1,500 people, all races, young people. And we found these really interesting statistics. 4 in 5 young people, people your age, are uncomfortable talking about race. Uncomfortable. To you, the ideal is to be colorblind, to not want to see race. Here's another interesting thing. Nearly half of white young people feel that discrimination against white people has become as big a problem as discrimination against people of color. You know why they feel that way? Because college scholarships. They feel that the Mexicans, the Latinos, the Asians, the blacks are the ones getting scholarships and there are none available to them. When you actually do this thing called reporting, you find out that that's actually not true. Private scholarships are more available to white students than students of color. You also find out that when white students complain that it's getting harder to get a scholarship, the reason for that is because there's so many more people going to college. It's like trying to get to the AP class, right? The competition is stiff. But how do we have a conversation about this? Reverse racism, it's called. How do we do that? Now, here's what I thought was a really interesting statistic, which was very new to me because I grew up in the Bay Area, I lived in New York, Los Angeles. Apparently, most white people live in kind of a bubble. The typical white American lives in a town that is more than 3/4 white, and the average white person's group of friends is more than 90% white. And no amount of listening to Drake and playing Grand Theft Auto is going to change that. I'm just saying. So if you, as a journalist who happen to be white, and I'm sorry to say this, but to me as a journalist, everybody's a source. So I try to surround myself with as many different people as possible. I try to have friends of all backgrounds, all political leanings, because it helps me think about, well, wait a second, why do people think that way? Calling somebody racist, homophobic, and sexist, that's easy. Trying to understand as a journalist why people think and feel the way that they do, that's a lot harder. And that's what we're supposed to do as journalists, right? So here's a trailer for white people. Oh, about white people. Well, I guess you know what I'm saying. So we're doing a film for MTV on what it means to be young and white. Okay.
Okay.
If you say the wrong thing, then suddenly you are a racist.
I'm trying to be careful here.
I don't want to offend people. I feel like you guys are attacking me now.
If I bring up any sort of race issue with my parents, they immediately assume that I'm demonizing them.
Give me a hug, give me a hug.
How might your life be different if you weren't white?
When you say white, what does that mean to you? We've never had to internalize what white people have done in America, but here, you can't escape that.
Feels like I'm being discriminated against. You kind of get this feeling that things belong to you.
I'm getting uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable.
Hey, this is great. Let's get all uncomfortable together.
The film is on YouTube. You can check it out. I'm very proud to say that the film was nominated for an Emmy, so wish us luck. But there are three things I want to say about this film. One, big kudos to all the young white people who were willing to talk about themselves on camera. This was really hard to do. It was really hard to get young white Americans to feel like they can talk about race and not be judged for it. That was really hard to do. So kudos to them. The second thing, that young woman who said, we haven't really faced what white people have done in this country. She's talking because she is teaching at a Native American high school, right? An Indian reservation, mostly Lakota students, Native Americans, right? She's white. All the teachers at the high school, Crazy Horse High School, is white. And the US history textbook that they use to teach the Native American kids are the same US history textbooks that call them savages. Can you imagine? That young white woman who was to me, I'm glad that she spoke up, she said, you kind of get this feeling that things belong to you. After she said that, she said, being white, someone said this in the film, being white is kind of, you're the default, you're the standard, you're the norm. And I started thinking, what a burden that must be, to think that you're the standard, the default, and the norm. And what happens when you realize that, you're actually not, right? Because guess what? We're all the norms and the defaults and the standards, right? What happens when that prism changes? What happens when white people live America and they go to Africa and Asia and you realize that you're actually in the minority? Which is, again, going to happen in this country. So how do we have this more honest conversation about that feeling and what that looks like for this country? And for me, as an immigrant, I was at the University of Georgia in Athens, like 4 years ago. I got invited by the college Republicans. And I try to speak to as many Republicans and Tea Party and conservative people as I possibly can. As a journalist, it's a really great exercise, right? So I came to this thing, and this young man and I got into this exchange, and he kept asking me questions. So finally, I started asking him questions. You know how people of color always get asked where we're from? Where are you from? So I'm like, I think it's about time that we start asking white people where they're from. So I'm like, hey, where are you from? He said, I'm American. Okay, where are you from? I'm white. Well, white is not a country. Where are you from? Are you from Norway? Are you from Sweden? Are you from Italy? I mean, do you know what Germans had to deal with? The anti-German, anti-Italian, anti-Irish hatred that was actually very, very, popular in this country when all those European immigrants first got here. Do you know any of that? It's like, oh, I didn't know that. And so how can you ask me where I'm from and how I got here if you don't know your own history? Every American, in my opinion, must be able to answer 3 fundamental questions. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? If you can't answer any of those questions, you can't call people illegal and you can't obsess over a border that you don't understand. So for me, this woman paid. She's my mom. She was the one that put me on a plane when I was 12. I have not seen her since I was 12, so it's been 23 years this August. She's in a 16-year waiting list to come here because that's the reality if you're an immigrant coming from Guatemala, India, the Philippines, or what they call third world countries. She can't even come visit for, here to get a tourist visa because she's not a college graduate and she doesn't own property. Now, mind you, if she were a French woman and she wanted to go see Hamilton over the weekend in New York, all she would have to do is buy a plane ticket, and before you know it, she's in New York. So don't talk to me about immigration not having to do with race and class and globalization, right? So I only talk to my mom mostly through Skype and Facebook chat. I'm just the person that, gives money every month. I have a brother who's 18 who I haven't met. He's my half-brother. I have a sister. When I left, she was a year and a half. I was there when she was born. I was in charge of the umbilical cord. She's now 24. And they only know me as the person that sends them stuff. I'm the guy that sends iPhones, That's me. Now, mind you, that's not unique. That's the reality for many, many immigrant families. This kind of separation, decades-long separation, is a reality that the media doesn't really cover a lot. I've heard horror stories from people who, when their parents die in Guatemala or India, can't leave, so they watch the funeral services through Skype. So that's the reality about what this issue is. And I am running as fast as I can, and I'm doing everything that I can, because I want to honor what this woman, my mom, did. I want to honor the sacrifice that she made. I want to honor what she paid for. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, for me, at Emerging Us right now, instead of going to like a big corporate media company to fund us, instead of going to a bunch of venture capitalists who are going to go, hey, that content is too edgy. Like, why are you talking about white people? Instead, I decided to do something that has never been done in American journalism, a crowdfunding campaign for $1 million. $1 million to crowdfund independent American journalism, right? We have raised almost $250,000 so far. We have 4 more days to go. And when I realized that I was coming here, I was thinking to myself, how can I get you guys to be a part of this? Now, I don't need, you guys are high school students. You don't have money, right? I mean, I'm sorry, I know. Starbucks is expensive, all that stuff you gotta do, right? So, but, to me, I would love for you to be a part of Emerging Us. I would love for you to be a part of what this is. So we actually launched a special high school challenge just in honor of all of you. So when you go to emergingus.com, which I know you'll do, right? You will find the instructions for this. So if you get your classmates and your colleagues for your newspaper to give $1 each, just $1 each, and you go to the website and give the money and say, this is from Mountain View High School or Sequoia High School. The most number of people from their high school, I will personally and at my own cost go to your high school, help edit your newspaper, talk to you about whatever content you want to talk about, whatever you want to edit, I will do for free. Right? For free. For free. But you only have 4 days to do this. And you're at this conference. So, talk to your, hey, you have Snapchat, you have stuff to do. So just tell people on Snap, tell them, and collect people. We need at least, for you to win, you need at least about 50 people to give $1 each. Just at least $1. And again, remember to sign your name. When you go to emergingus.com, you'll find the rules. I would really love, by the way, I don't care if you're in Minnesota, Mississippi, Montana. I've been actually to 48 of the 50 states in the past 5 years. I have not been to Montana and Alaska. So if you're from there, it'd be awesome. I would really love for you to be a part of this. I would love for you to be a part of history, right? Which is, now let me go back to this question of history. So I have been a journalist for 17 years. 17 years, probably as long as some of you have been alive. And as I end this speech, I think it's really important that you ask hard questions of yourselves about what kind of journalist are you gonna be? In what medium do you want to tell stories? Articles, video, podcasts, photographs? Like, here's the big question. What role will diversity play? If you're in a newsroom of mostly white journalists and you're trying to cover a community that is 40% people of color, are you going to be the white journalist that raises their hand and say, this is not acceptable? We need more people of color in journalism. We need more people of color in newsrooms. So are you going to be that white ally, that white journalist that says, we need to do better here. We need to cover this issue more contextually and more responsibly, right? That's a big question. And as I mentioned, to me, this is more than a business. It's more than a job. Freedom of the press is protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Journalism is public service, and journalism is there not only to inform, not only to educate, not only to enlighten, but journalism is there to liberate. Journalism is there to build bridges and create empathy. Journalism is there to connect, not divide, to connect all of us. That's what journalism is there for. And you know when I started realizing that? I started realizing that when I was in high school, and I would do these Q&As at the Mountain View Oracle, and I would ask questions like, do you feel that Mountain View High School is racially inclusive? And then they would give me all these answers. And then now I'm thinking, if I were a journalist at your high school now, how would I do this? Would I do like a GoPro thing? How would I do this? Do I put this up on like Reddit? I don't know. I'm actually really interested in that. How do I make this better? And since we are talking about pieces of papers, as a journalist, I'm gonna inform you on some things. I am actually the only piece of document. Tomorrow I fly to San Francisco for the weekend to do an event. Yay, San Francisco. The only piece of ID that I have that I can use at LAX tomorrow morning is my Filipino passport. This is the only ID that the government can accept from me. The passport doesn't have a visa. So if the TSA flips it and doesn't see the visa, they can actually arrest me. But my lawyers, I have 27 lawyers, my lawyers think it's okay. Because guess what? I'm not Mexican. If this were a Mexican passport and there's no visa, I would be in trouble. Right? Because if you're Mexican, they really check your papers. The only piece of ID that I really have accepting is a California driver's license. California is only one of 12 states plus Washington, D.C. to let people like me drive. And in the license, it actually says federal limits apply. Meaning I can't use this license in states that don't allow people like me to drive, like Texas. Texas is home to 1.7 million undocumented people. Is there a good subway system and bus system in Texas? How do you think all those undocumented workers, millions of them, get around? And what happens when they drive without a license? And they get pulled over before you know it, they're arrested before you know it, they're detained before you know it, they're separated from the family. Isn't that a really good story to be reporting on? Right? The majority of states in this country don't allow people like us to drive. So I don't know what you want us to do. I guess some of us can walk. When I was in high school, I was the kid. I was like driving Miss Daisy. Everybody drove me around, especially during deadlines at the Oracle, because I didn't drive. I couldn't tell them why I didn't have a license. I just told them, I'm really afraid of cars. I lied. So I just bummed up rides. Sometimes the janitors would give me a ride home. But that's why I really bonded with a lot of my journalism colleagues, because they were my ride home. They were the ones that got me home, especially, when you're like a deadline until 12:30 in the morning, you don't know where to go, right? So these stories for me are really important. My only piece of real paper from the government is when I got arrested in Texas 2 summers ago. You're seeing a pattern here, Texas. I got arrested for 8 hours. I was detained for 8 hours. This was during the Central American refugee crisis. I was put in the exact same jail cell as the kids. Can you imagine these kids? They separated them by gender. I was with the boys, ages 6 to 14, in a jail cell, because in this country we can't have a conversation about immigration. And I was only detained for 8 hours, because then the White House called and bailed me out. I didn't call them, but apparently it was too much trouble to arrest me and detain me, so they got me out. And then when I got out, they gave me this piece of paper. It says, warrant for arrest of alien. I am to carry it with me everywhere I go. This is apparently my pieces of papers from the government. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because you know what matters to me? What matters to me is the Mountain View High School Oracle. What matters to me is my journalism. What matters to me is my contribution to journalism. What matters to me is journalism has allowed me not only to exist, it has allowed me to be in this country and to make sense of it. And it's given me a sense of purpose, a passion. It has given me a way to keep telling myself to not be a know-it-all, because I don't know everything, and to realize that the world doesn't revolve around me, and that the three most dangerous words in the English language are I, me, and my. Opinion is cheap, reporting is hard. Opinion is cheap, reporting is hard. So, before I start taking your questions, I hope that you take what you do seriously. I hope, as you mentioned, that you realize that journalism does matter. And I hope that you realize your incredible responsibility to help write a rough draft of this evolving American history. Thank you so much for having me here. Oh, question. Oh, no, you don't have to sit down. Oh, you don't have to do that. That's so kind. Thank you. Thank you. You're making me nervous. Sit down. Okay, let's get to questions. The more uncomfortable and the harder the question, the better. So, somebody asked me a hard question.
Fantastic. If you have a question for Mr. Vargas, then just raise your hand. I'll get to as many as possible. To get things started, I do want to kind of follow up on your last comment. For students interested in starting this conversation at their schools about race and about immigration, where do they start in their school publication?
Well, they go to emergingus.com and they help us with this thing, and then I'll go to your school. No, but in reality, one of the things we're actually going to do at Emerging Us is we're going to create a clearinghouse where student journalists can find sources as to how to better report on race and immigration in their newsrooms. That's one of the things that we're going to do. Because unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources. Unfortunately, even my own colleagues, by the way, I remember when some journalist said, well, you're not a journalist anymore. You've taken a stance. A stance for what? For humanity and dignity? Is that the stance? So, it's not just about objectivity. It's about being fair. It's about being accurate. Yes. I can't see you, sir. What's up?
My name is Emily Enriquez. I'm from Pinnacle High School in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yay.
I'm half Mexican, and I have freckles and green eyes, so a lot of times I pass off as a white person, which has definitely led to some good stuff. For a matter of fact, my high school is mostly white people, and people of color are definitely the minorities. So how can we talk about race issues? Like, how should I bring it up to a school where we have about as diversity as a Isle of Mayo?
So I'm curious, by the way, what is the name of your high school paper?
We are Blueprint Magazine.
Oh, the magazine. So this is why student journalism is so important, because it's really the only place where these conversations can be had. Is there a way for you to actually talk to the faculty and figure out if you could do an event or some sort of a Q&A or some sort of a conversation or something? Is that something to do?
We could our school doesn't really do many Q&A with faculties, but we could definitely bring it up.
Or if you want to screen white people and have a conversation about it, it always kind of goes well. Well, not well, it just gets really controversial. I think that's one way to go. But to me, though, you can't be afraid to ask these questions and to try to figure out which advisors and which faculty members at the school can actually help you do it. And by the way, can we give a round of applause to all the advisors in this room? All the Mrs. Doers in the room, yes. Question? I'm sorry, I can't see you.
Hi, I'm Shelby Schumacher.
Hi.
I'm from Hanford High School in Richland, Washington.
Yay.
And my entire life, I was born in Minnesota, and I was raised to not necessarily colorblind. Like, I recognize other people of other races, people of other different backgrounds, but it never. I was taught for it to never affect how I look at other people, And now as a senior, I have discovered that I have a passion for learning about different people's cultures. And I was in MSP, and I was talking with a guy who ran a coffee stand. I was getting a smoothie, not a coffee. I don't drink coffee. And he had an accent, and I asked him where he was from, completely innocently, because I was interested. And he said, "Well, I'm from my mother. I'm from my mother." And I was like, "I'm completely sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." And I had to go through a whole spiel talking about how I was interested in learning about cultures. I love learning about different people's cultures. I love learning about their backgrounds. I love learning about traditions.
Yeah.
And then he asked me, "Are you from here?" And I said, "Well, I was born in Minnesota." And then he opened up. So
Yeah.
how do I ask people about their backgrounds and ask people about like where they're from or like who they are or their different cultures without A, offending them, and B, making me look like I'm trying to show that there's a difference, like that we're not equal as people?
Well, first of all, the way you're asking this question already tells me that you're a sensitive person. So kudos for that, right? But you know what's really interesting about this kind of situation is when that guy said to you, "I'm from my mother," he wasn't just saying that to you, he was saying that to every single person who has ever asked him that question because he had an accent, right? So the one thing to do is to not take it personally. The one thing to do is to realize that this is what happens when people feel discriminated against, right? They feel like resentment builds up, right? As a person of color, I have to tell you, I am so tired of having to explain myself to people, right? I feel like white people just get to be who they are, and people of color always have to explain who we are, right? So that's like societal, right? And the way to open that up is to do exactly what you just did, which is, you know what? By the way, you could have just walked away. You could have been like, "Oh, this is awkward. Never mind." But because you're a journalist, you're like, "I'm gonna push right through." Right? And I'm gonna ask another questions and he's gonna open up. By the way, for me as a journalist, I find that the most exciting is when I talk to somebody and they seem a little bit like hostile and then I get them to bend. Oh, isn't that the best feeling in the world? It's the best feeling in the world, right? I mean, that is when I feel most alive as a journalist and as a person. So you're already doing it. Just don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. Yes. Another question?
Okay, hi, I'm Navina, and I'm also from Hanford High School. And I guess my question would be, so in our school, there's a lot of reverse racism going on. Like, when we try to have conversations about college with our friends and stuff, the one thing that people genuinely believe is that when my college application says that I'm an Indian, colleges are like, automatically, they're like, "We want you, you're in." And that's not true, though, because, I mean, my race doesn't play such a big thing into the matter. But how do you tell people that, like, reverse racism, how do you deal with that?
I'm just curious, how would you define reverse racism?
Like when white people believe that they're being discriminated against.
And do you feel that that's a valid thing?
I don't know what to think, honestly.
Well, I mean, to me, racism was, the people who can stop racism are white people, right? Only white people can end racism because that's where it started, right? Like what you're talking about, reverse racism, is really defensive racism, right? When a person of color goes, "Wait a second, I'm gonna do to you what you're doing to me, or what historically you've done to us." So there's a lot of othering that happens. And you know, though, what really gets uncomfortable in these conversations is reverse racism, affirmative action, all of that. I think what happens is it closes off the conversation, like the term white privilege, right? I've met and talked to a lot of poor white people who don't feel privileged at all, right? How does class play a role into this? And again, instead of calling someone a racist, I think trying to understand how they got to that position. Is it because they don't know anybody who's of another race? Is it because they make stereotypes about, "Oh, just because I'm this, I'm gonna get into college," right? To me, I see this in my own nieces and nephews who are your age. What I'm realizing, which is a little scary to me, is where they go to school, I've been surprised when I've visited their high schools, seeing how kind of separated it is, how people just kind of go by their own clique, and the clique seems very color coordinated. And again, as a journalist, your job is to not be in a clique. Your job is to be in all of the cliques. Your job is to figure out, right? That's your job. You can't have a clique. Your clique is nerd journalism. That's your clique. So figuring out why people have these biases, I think it takes a lot of digging deep to and not making assumptions. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hello? I can't see you, sir.
Hi, my name is Chris Stanko from Wenatchee High School, and there's one part of your speech that really spoke to me about how you're saying if you had a newspaper in a with a heavy population of minorities, but a lot of white people on staff. I mean, we have a situation very much like that in our high school. We have a 44.7% Hispanic population, but our newspaper staff is far from 44.7% Hispanic. So I guess my question to you would be, how would we encourage people in our Hispanic community at our high school to join the student newspaper, to write for us, and to bring them into our community?
Now, mind you, that's the fact that there are not that many people of color in newspapers is not the fault of white people. It's not the fault of white journalists, right? But the question is, how are those white journalists going to react and say, wait a second, if we're going to do a story about Black Lives Matter, it might be a good idea to actually have some black people on staff. If you're going to talk about immigration, maybe it's a good idea to talk to people from immigrant families, right? So how do you bring them? And again, I wish I were your age. I wish I was at the Oracle where you are now. Because when I think about social media, to me, social media isn't really social media. It's like the me in media. There's a me in media. Everybody wants to tell their story, right? But storytelling is not journalism. They're different. So how do you use all these people that want to tell their story so you can produce journalism? So I think there's creative ways you can do that. By the way, in your high schools, I'm fascinated about Asian model minority myth. I'm fascinated by that. How do you start a diary or a journal series of Asian students who feel that they're the minority good ones or whatever, and run that in the paper? That might be kind of interesting. Or white students who feel that there's reverse racism, having them explain what reverse racism is. I think there's a way that can do this that can actually be very journalistically responsible and accessible.
All right, our last question of tonight is going to come from Franco.
What's up, Frank?
Hi, Jose. Thank you. My name is Franco Vidal. I am from John Doe North High School from Riverside, California. And so my question is, I am an undocumented citizen here.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I am an undocumented citizen here. I am.
Oh, you are?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that the first time you've ever told a big-ass crowd of people this?
I mean, it's a huge crowd, so...
but you're okay. You're going to be okay.
I came out of this topic around 2 years ago, and I felt liberated. This was a huge burden on me, and I am a huge advocate about sharing my story and telling people of my experiences and what it means to be undocumented. But at times, and I do feel that it's an important story to tell, whether who you are or where you come from, but at times I feel conflicted, mainly in my household, because though I support that you should share your story, and my father also supports me, at times my mother, who is a very caring woman, is very skeptical about it, because when I share it opens up to the fact that I leave my family vulnerable and exposed, that maybe I could do harm to them or even bring strange things to them. I am a DACA student. I am exempted from deportation for the next 2 years. And though I have that security, my father and my mother don't. So people who, in my situation, how can we tell our stories without harming those who are affected by sharing our story?
Well, first of all, can everybody give him a round of applause for... And look, I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat. I'm independent, and by the way, I'm undocumented, so I can't vote anyway. But we can guarantee you that Donald Trump is not going to hurt you. You have 3,000 people here. So you're gonna be fine, okay? You're gonna be fine. So, but to your question, I've come out of 2 closets in my life. And I'm done of coming out of any more closets. And what I've really realized is you can't force people to do it. You have to make that decision for yourself. You know, when I came out as undocumented, the very person who was most scared is my grandmother. She's a US citizen. My grandmother was scared when she saw my byline at the Mountain View Oracle when I was in high school. She was like, we're supposed to hide. Why is your name on the paper? So she's been scared for 20 years now. And when I came out as undocumented, she was very, very scared. When I got arrested and she saw me in handcuffs on CNN, she was very, very scared. All I can really do is tell her that I love her and it's gonna be okay. And your mom, she's only acting out of very natural fear, right? And acting out of love. But you know what though? I think she must be so proud of you, deep inside, right? Because what country are you from? Your parents from?
I was born and raised in Lima, Peru for the first 5 years of my life.
Peru. This is really the last thing I want to say to all of you, and I'm saying this to all of you as journalists and as human beings. I hope you know where you come from, and I hope that you know what was sacrificed for you to be here. For you to be in a country like this that gives you freedom of speech guaranteed by the First Amendment. To be in a country where you're allowed and you're encouraged to say what you think and research the truth. One of my favorite quotes is from my favorite writer, James Baldwin. I know people know who he is. I think a lot about this quote a lot when I get depressed, because I'm 35, I can't leave this country. Everybody thinks I'm Mexican. I should at least go to Mexico, but I can't go. So I get really depressed sometimes about, I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm in perpetual limbo, right? But then I think about what my grandparents sacrificed and my mom, and there's this quote from Baldwin. He said, your crown has been bought and paid for. Your ancestors, great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, they already gave it up for you. It's already done. Now you can love yourself. It's possible. So, to all of you, I have 2 requests. 1, go to defineamerican.com and please sign the pledge. If you want your high school newspaper or magazine to be careful around the words that it uses so it can be more accurate, please join us. The second thing, I would love to go to your campus. So go to our high school challenge. And thank you so much for having me here.
One more round of applause for Jose Antonio Vargas.